South Hills, I want to take a moment and just say thank you. Your investment is impacting people's stories inside and outside the walls of our campuses, both now and for generations to come. In 2022, we've already given over $70,000 to Above and Beyond. And what these funds have been able to do is have our campuses give and serve in the communities, help them know that we love them, there's a church that believes in them, and that there's a God who wants to connect with them. And we've also been able to donate funds to an organization called Jacaranda Housing, which is a foster agency for women who graduate from the foster system, and it allows them to have someone to walk alongside of their lives so that they can have a career and stand on their own 2 feet. We also have given consistently to an organization called Tumaini International. We sponsor children, we help them get educated, we help them get connected to the local church so they can build a relationship with God. Your generosity impacts way more than just financial numbers. Attendance this year alone has been up over 20%, and because of your generosity, we've seen God move in lives like never before. This year alone, 221 people have started giving for the very first time. We've had over 149 people take the next step and be a part of one of our Discover classes. 693 kids checked in for the first time at all of our campuses. And the number that always gets me the most excited, we've had 314 people this year alone say yes to Jesus for the very first time. Why? Because of your generosity. And people's lives for eternity are being changed, not just beyond this lifetime, but during this lifetime. Thank you, South Hills, for your heart. Thank you for trusting God with your finances, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of that journey.
Wasn't that great stuff, though, that Pastor Moses shared on that video, man? So many amazing things. I mean, 314 people having stepped across the line of faith and said yes to Jesus, just fantastic. So I'm so stoked about what God is doing at South Hills as a whole, but especially here at our campus, and thanks for being a part of that. Well, every single day of your life is shaped by the words that you use. In fact, your health, your relational health, your happiness, your satisfaction, your success, how meaningful your life feels, how full or empty it is, it's all impacted and informed by your conversations, by your words. And so we're going to talk for the next month a lot in this series about all the talking that we do. But I wanted to start today with the second most important conversation that you will ever have in your life. Now, the most important conversation you'll ever have is the conversation that will take place between you and God. And God is constantly speaking to you. He's constantly talking to you. And certainly, no matter what you think or feel or believe about him, you've had moments and times in your life where you have spoken to him, that there's a conversation that's ongoing between you and God. The question is whether you are listening or whether you're a part of it or you're engaging in it. So that's the very first, the most important conversation in your life. And we're going to get into that in a few weeks. But the second most important conversation you will ever have in your life is the conversation that you have with yourself. It's all the words that you speak to you. And it's important for two reasons, because of all the people, the first one is, of all the people on the planet, you talk to you way more than anyone else. And then secondly, the conversation that you have with yourself ultimately will set the standard for every other conversation that you will ever have in your life. So I am a shower singer. Any shower singers in the building, in the room? Okay, a couple of us. My wife and I are completely different in this regard. We have been married going on 27 years here in just this week. I was going to say a couple weeks, but it's a couple days. And And she has not sang a single note ever in the shower in 27 years. I sing all the time in the shower. Part of the reason why I don't think she sings in the shower, she doesn't have time. She literally is in the shower for about 3.2 minutes. And I mean, it's very functional. Rinse, wash, get out. And I'm just like, I'm in there. It's my happy spot. I'm in there for about 18 minutes is my average, I think. So I'm taking some long showers. So I got plenty of time to sing and work it out, work out that little run that I'm trying to figure out, how's that go? But anybody sing in the car? Any car singers? Typically if you're a shower singer, you're also a car singer. I don't listen to music very often in the car because, well, I'm old and I've reached the point where I just listen to talk stuff in the car instead of music. But when I do, I'm all in. And I have no shame. I don't care if people see me rocking out. I don't care if people pull up next to me at a light and they see me singing at the top of my lungs. I don't care if they see me playing the air guitar or the steering wheel drums, but because I'm a pro at that. But I go for it. And the reason is because music is so powerful. And like, have you ever had a song stuck in your head and you just can't get rid of it? I mean, sometimes it's a song that you like, right? Like, and you're not even mad. It's Any Way You Want It by Journey, or it's, Say Something by Justin Timberlake and Chris Stapleton, or it's Uptown Funk, and you're fine, you're good. But other times it can be a little bit more annoying, right? Like it's Call Me Maybe, or it's Bringing Sexy Back, or, unless you're actually bringing sexy back, it's kind of annoying. Or it's something by Creed or Nickelback or anything like that. Yeah, but have you ever had that moment that no matter what you do, you just can't seem to get rid of it? Like it's up there on repeat and you can't get it to stop. Now, what's interesting is your mind has its own soundtrack. Because you have a nonstop conversation going on inside your head. You have an inner monologue that's constantly giving you unsolicited commentary on everything. But it does have one particular topic that it really likes to talk about, and that is you. Like that voice inside you, inside your head, it has thoughts. And it's not shy about sharing them, right? It has thoughts about your intelligence. It has thoughts about your competence. It has thoughts about your happiness, your looks, your abilities, your past, your future, your worth, your relationships, your performances. And your soundtrack has a particular angle and style to it, right? Like, and you probably don't remember choosing it, but it's there. And even if it doesn't represent what you value or what you want to value or who you want to be or the way that you want to see the world, it is there on repeat. And it's really hard to ignore or shut off, right? I wonder if we could tune into the soundtrack that's in your head, what would be the title track on the self-talk single that's stuck in your mind most often? Because we all have them. Let me give you some of the greatest hits from my head. See if you can relate to any of them. One of them is pride. This thing that constantly gets said over and over is, I'm better than them, or I'm better than that. I could do that better. I don't know why they chose them. I'm better than that. Another one's performance, right? If I just do more, if I do it better, people will like me. They'll love me more. God will love me more. I'll love me more. There's one that I call permanence, this sense that no matter what's happening, it's just always going to be this way, right? Why? I don't know. I'm just stuck in this situation. My life's not going to change. My job's not going to change. My family's not going to change. Nothing's going to change. It's always going to be this way. Or there's one called pity, right? Where we're just like, it's okay that terrible things happen because I just don't really deserve anything. Like, you deserve this. You deserve all this bad stuff that's happening to you. Or pessimism, that sense of like, I know I'm just going to fail. I know I'm just going to screw this up. So why would I try? Any of those sound familiar to you? Now, could you imagine if all of the people around you could hear you talk to yourself? If they could, the truth is that they'd probably be pretty surprised, maybe taken aback at just how dark or destructive, hurtful, even hateful the things that we say to ourselves actually are. Because when you stop and think about it, if you were just like everybody else, you talk to yourself in ways that you would never talk to anybody else. Now, the weird thing is, like a song that you've heard a million times that's just sort of playing in the background when you're at the grocery store, sometimes we're not even aware that it's playing, right? Like have you ever been somewhere and you caught yourself singing along with a song that was playing in the background somewhere, just kind of it was in the background, the noise. You weren't even aware, and you caught yourself singing because before you were even really conscious that it was there. And it's like it was just, you were powerless against it. It actually made me think of this. One of my favorite Christmas movies is The Grinch. And there's this scene where he hates the Who's and he hates everything about them and how happy they are and cheery they are and everything about Christmas and their Christmas carols and their songs. But he can't help but get swept up in it. And this happens. Take a look.
Blast this Christmas music. It's joyful and triumphant.
Right, that's how you feel. Why am I singing along with this? I don't even like this song, right? By the way, there's only 140 days till Christmas. Now, I don't know about you, but I've felt just as helpless in just like that moment right there, just as helpless and hopeless when it comes to the soundtrack that's on repeat in my head. Because no matter how toxic or self-destructive it is, sometimes it feels like there's nothing that I can do about it, right? And if you've ever felt like that, you are not alone, because this isn't just a you thing or a me thing, it's an everybody thing, it's a human thing. And so when we look into the scriptures, there are all kinds of people, many of the biggest names that you may be familiar with, who were in the same boat as we are when it comes to the conversation that was going on in their head. For instance, King David, you may have heard of him. His mind could go to some really, really dark places. In fact, one of them is found in Psalms 22. I just want to read a little bit from that psalm of things that he wrote. He says this in verses 1 and 2. He says, my God, why have you abandoned me? I have cried desperately for help, but still it does not come. During the day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. I call at night, but I get no rest. Right? Do you see the pessimism, the fatalism? It's permanent. You're not around. This is never going to change. Verse 6, he says, I'm no longer a human being. I am a worm, despised and scorned by everyone. That's probably not true. Verse 7, all who see me make fun of me. They stick out their tongues and they shake their heads. And then he does what we do, right? He starts making these really odd comparisons and things that don't even make sense, right? It's like he says, many enemies surround me like bulls. I didn't even know bulls surrounded prey, like when they were about to attack, circle up, fellas. But these are not just your ordinary bulls. He says they're all around me like the fierce bulls from the land of Bashan. You guys know the legendary Bashan bulls. You know what he's talking about. And then he gets his metaphors all confused and mixed up because he's talking about bulls, but then he says they open their mouths like lions. Well, which is it, David? Are they bulls or are they lions? Are they lion bulls or bull lions? And he says they're roaring and they're tearing at me. And he goes on and on and on like this. And some of it's actually kind of funny. But we're basically, when we read some of this stuff, we're reading David's thoughts. We're reading his inner monologue. The truth is, it's not all that different from ours, right? If we could listen in to the conversation in your head, what would the themes be like, right? It probably would be like David, right? Where there's some situations that are maybe being over-dramatized, like some of what David was doing. Maybe some wild and exaggerated comparisons, like what David was doing. Maybe some faulty filters of the way that you're processing and looking at the world. See, in my mind, I don't know about you, but my mind seems to always be serving up a really nice mixture of unattainable standards with a little bit of unrealistic expectations mixed in, with a little bit of side drama, and to top it off with some catastrophizing. And there you have it, folks. The Randy Sherwood story, right? The hard part is it's not like this internal conversation is completely disconnected from reality, though, right? Because you've been through some dark and painful stuff. That's part of what's informing that soundtrack. And that was true of David. I mean, things had been all over the place in his life. So check this out. You may know some of this stuff, but maybe you didn't know quite the ages that all this stuff was happening for him. So at age 10, David's life changed forever when the prophet in Israel showed up out of the blue to his house, to his dad's house, and told him and told his family that he had been chosen by God to be the next king in Israel. 5 years later, David fought and killed the giant Goliath. So at age 15, David is a legend who's just sort of waiting around to be crowned the king. I don't know what your life was like about 15 years old, but that's a pretty good life for a 15-year-old. But from there, the wheels come off, because as it turns out, kings really like their gigs, and they don't really like, the idea of it being taken from them. And so the current king, Saul, leverages his entire kingdom, all of his power and resources, to absolutely seek and destroy David, both figuratively and literally. And so David has to go and run for his life for 17 years. 17 years he's on the run. I mean, think about that. Where were you in 2005? What was going on in your life? How different was your life then than it is now? Think about all the life you've lived since then. That is a long, stinking time. And when you're on the run, that is a really tough life. And while there were definitely some highs in there for him, there were a ton of lows. And the whole situation kind of culminates in this moment in 1 Samuel chapter 30. It says, when David and his men arrived home at their town of Ziklag, they found that the Amalekites had raided it, had crushed it, and burned it to the ground. And they had carried off the women and children. And when David and his men saw the ruins and realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. And David was in great danger because all of his men were very bitter about losing their sons and daughters, and they began to talk about stoning him. Now, I don't know about you, but there are times where it doesn't take very much at all to send us sort of spiraling into negativity or, toxic thoughts, or just kind of a pessimistic attitude, right? Or negative attitude. Like, have you ever known somebody who could find the negative in even the best and most positive of circumstances? Right? Like we've all known people like that, but that's not what this is, right? This is a horrifying moment. This is a worst nightmare kind of scenario. David and his men are exhausted. They're weary. They've been on the run for 17 years. And while they've been away this last little stint doing what they got to do to stay alive, their homes are destroyed and their families are carried off and taken captive. And all of his men, all of the people that are with him, they've all reached their breaking point. Even his best friends, his closest advisors, all of the men who had fought alongside him all of these years, they start wondering if it's worth it, right? If he's worth it. Like maybe they should just do what King Saul hasn't been able to do and just kill David and be done with it. And then their lives could just go back to normal. It's no wonder that David's inner dialogue in Psalm 22 read the way that it did, right? It's at least understandable, right? And that's the thing. Like, what do you do when the repetitive sort of negativity, the toxic thoughts are connected to reality, right? When they're rooted in something that's real, when life really does suck, when people have turned on you, when people around you are hurting because of you. Because just trying to stay positive doesn't cut it, right? Sticking your head in the sand and pretending that it's all going to be okay won't help. So let me show you what David did. Back to 1 Samuel. Verse 30, it's a very simple phrase. It says this: but David found strength in the Lord, his God. Now, if you are not particularly spiritual, or you're not a church person, you're not following Jesus, like, I know that kind of sounds like some spiritual mumbo jumbo, but there's something truly powerful, even transformational here. So part of the problem that this feels a little bit weak to us when we read it is because of the way it gets translated into English. And so when we read found strength, it makes it sound like something that just sort of happened to him, right? Like David just sort of passively stumbled into it, that God showed up to do his God thing and to help him and comfort him in that moment. And that's amazing. And that's not hard to believe because that's who God is, right? And that's what God does. But that's only part of what's happening here. See, because the imagery isn't passive, it's actually very proactive. This isn't something that happened to David David. It's something that David did for himself. It's something that David made happen. In fact, there's a lot of other English translations that say it just that way. They say that David encouraged himself or strengthened himself in the Lord. They don't say he just found it, that somehow he was able to find something within it, that he was able to encourage and strengthen himself in God. Now that matters because if he can do it in a moment that's this dark, that's this challenging, you and I can do it no matter what we're facing. Now the question in all of this is like, what does that actually mean that he strengthened himself, that he encouraged himself in God? Well, there's a couple of ideas in the New Testament that I think will help us see what this actually looks like. The first one's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, and it says this. It says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Now, the truth is, if you listen to any thought long enough, it's going to get ingrained in your mind and will actually eventually become just a regular part of your personal soundtrack and playlist. But here in this verse, the guy who wrote this, his name was Paul, he seemed to think that we actually can edit our thoughts, that we can actually break in on the soundtrack and do something about it. And he's going like, you're gonna have all kinds of thoughts and arguments and claims that'll run through your head that are counter to what's true about God and what's true about life and what's true about the people in your life and ultimately what's true about you. But you're not just helplessly at the mercy of those broken thoughts and those broken soundtracks. You can actually do something about them. See, here's the truth. You can't control every thought you have, but you can control what you think about. Because your thoughts don't always know best. And you don't have to listen to and obey them, right? You get to choose which ones of them you give attention to and which ones of them you ignore. Okay, so that's kind of the first idea of what it looks like to strengthen yourself in God, is to begin to step in and break into the middle of that regularly scheduled program that's running in your head. But then there's this other idea that's kind of related. It's found in 1 Thessalonians 5:21. The same guy who just wrote that, he said this, test everything that is said, hold on to what is good. Now, the context of what he's writing about, he's talking about the stuff that people say about God, the stuff that people claim that God has said, about what's true and about what's not true. But I don't want you to miss the principle, because there's an underlying principle here. Because it ultimately includes the stuff that you say to yourself. Because one of the greatest mistakes that we can make in life is assuming that all of our thoughts are true. And so the Apostle Paul says, no, don't do that. He says, test it. Scrutinize it, put it under the microscope, put it on the stand and cross-examine it. Is it true? Is it completely true? Is it good? Is it helpful? And he says, if it's not, just hold on to what's good. One of my favorite things about what he says here, and it's kind of lost again because of just English, but the word that he writes there for good, it actually literally means beautiful and honorable and godlike and true and helpful. It means that something that will motivate you towards doing more good in your life. And he's going, if it doesn't pass that test, it ain't for you. Don't grab onto it. Just let it go. Which reminds me of something else he said in Philippians 4:8. Whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. What's he saying? Right? He's going, you got to take control of the conversation in your head. Because if you don't, it'll just naturally go toxic. It'll just naturally go negative and fearful and ugly and dark and paranoid. See, I think some of us, we need to stop listening to ourselves and we need to start talking to ourselves. Because you have this thing that's just going to play, this dialogue, this monologue that's just going. It's just going. And you got to actually break in and say, hold on, you're done. Now I'm going to talk. Hold on. I'm going to set the agenda for the conversation. Hold on. This is what I'm going to think about. See, you're going to be tempted to blindly trust the way that you interpret situations and circumstances, and you're going to, as if your perspective and your way of taking in the world in a given moment is completely accurate. And the soundtrack that you have in your mind can be really, really persuasive, and it can sound very wise and true because it sounds like the person who knows you best, the person that is your favorite. It sounds like you. And you wouldn't lie to you. You would only tell yourself the truth, right? And so you're tempted to just take it and accept it as it is. And just blindly go along with it. But what he's saying is we need to take the time to compare our thoughts, our interpretations, our conclusions to God's heart and God's perspective on our life and our situation. And that ultimately we have to get to the point where we refuse to repeat anything to ourselves that a good and loving God wouldn't say to us. If the God who knows you best and loves you most wouldn't say it to you, then you have no business saying it to yourself. By the way, we don't become who we want to be by beating ourselves up for who we've been. Right? You will never step into the future you're hoping to have if you constantly are angry at yourself for the past that you've lived. See, if God wouldn't say it to you, if God wouldn't say it about you, then it doesn't belong in the conversation that you're having with yourself. Now, this is not about denying reality or pretending that something didn't happen or isn't happening. This is about the meaning that you assign to it all. It's about the conversation that you have with yourself about why it's happening and what it all means. See, I think these ideas taken together, I think this is what finding strength or strengthening yourself in God looks like. Because whatever David told himself in one of his darkest moments actually made him stronger, not weaker. It made him more like God, not less. See, that's why the soundtrack matters, right? Because the things that you say to yourself most often will determine what you believe is possible and who you will become. It wasn't just true of David. Let me show you another example, kind of on the negative side, right? One of the most famous moments, not only in the scriptures, but in all of history, is the exodus of the people of Israel coming out of Egypt, out of slavery. Stories found in the book of Exodus. And at that moment, the Pharaoh that was the ruling over Egypt, that kind of oversaw that, like he did not let them go. God had to force his hand with plagues and punishments and all kinds of things, right? And even in the midst of what God was doing, his advisors were coming to him and going, hey, we need to get with the program. Like, it feels like we're fighting against, it's not our God, but it feels like we're fighting against a God and we're losing. But no matter what happened, he just kept hardening his heart. In fact, in Exodus chapter 8, verse 19, that's exactly the scenario. It says, then the magicians, all of his advisors and magicians and sorcerers come to him and they say to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. Meaning the plague that's happening to us, this terrible thing that's happening to all of us, it's the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said or the Lord had predicted. So I know sometimes, again, the language seems different, but it's the exact same scenario as with David. See, Pharaoh did the opposite of what David did, though. Whatever the conversation was that was going on inside of him and how he was interpreting the situation, that hardened his heart. That made him more entitled, more angry, more prideful, more bitter, more vengeful. And so while Pharaoh became known for his hard heart, David was famously described as being a man after God's heart. The conversations they had with themselves impacted their heart and their core and who they became. And ultimately, it shaped how they felt about and experienced and reacted to all of life. And so David's heart became softer and stronger, and Pharaoh's heart became harder and more cynical. What a huge, huge difference. See, when the scriptures talk about our heart, it's not just talking about our core. Yes, it's where, our thoughts and our attitudes originate, but it's also the place that we process and make sense of what's happening to us and around us. For instance, have you ever known someone who has somehow just had the ability to make every situation about them, no matter what it was? Or someone who was super sensitive, super insecure, and kind of thin-skinned? Someone who was really negative or fatalistic, who could find the downside in any situation. Somebody who could suck the energy and joy and hope and life out of every room that they walked into and every conversation they stepped into. And maybe you took it as a challenge where you're just going to put all your energy into being uplifting and encouraging and positive to counteract the negativity that they bring into the mix. But it just seems like it had no effect. Like no matter how much love or positivity or encouragement you gave, it was just bouncing off their negativity shields. Just pew, pew, pew. Like you could not penetrate through what they had going on. It's like their heart wouldn't let it in. It's like their heart was hard. I think one of the things that's fascinating about Pharaoh and David's stories, both of them, is, I don't know if you caught this or not, but in both stories, how they responded in this moment, the conversation they had going in their heads, it impacted the interactions that they had with the other people around them. So David strengthened himself in God, and he was able to keep all that toxic stuff from his friends and all that stuff that they were saying from poisoning his heart. So the people that he didn't move forward and just abandon them, oh, you guys are gonna kill me now, like get out of here. No, he knew like these guys are in distress, they're hurting, their wives and children have been kidnapped. So they move on together. Pharaoh, on the other hand, he hardens his heart. And even though all of the people that he trusts around him are going, hey man, like, do you see what's happening here? You are fighting against God. He couldn't hear them. He could not hear the truth that they were speaking to him. See, no matter how hard you try, you cannot hide the things that you're saying to yourself. The conversation that's ongoing in your soul will always spill out into the conversations that you have with other people. It always, always will. Because in the end, everything else everyone says to you will always be filtered through what you say to you, and vice versa. Everything you say to other people, it's going to be filtered through what you say to you. See, we tend to focus on what's wrong with other people because we're focused on what's wrong with us. Right? If we judge and are harsh with ourselves, we're going to be people who will be judgmental and harsh towards other people. If we're compassionate and gracious and loving towards ourselves, then we'll be compassionate and gracious and loving towards others. Now, I'm not talking about being self-deluded, right? I'm not talking about you letting yourself off the hook for stuff you know. I'm talking about the genuine way in which you respond to the fact that you're just a broken, messy human being. Now, the question in all of this is, well, okay, then how do we shift? How do we shift our thoughts? How do we change the conversation? Where do we even start? Well, honestly, I think it's much more practical than we think it is. Yes, it's going to require some intentionality. It's going to require some repetition because it's like a muscle that you got to flex, right? Because the soundtrack's going to play. It's just going to go. You actually have to practice interrupting it. You got to practice what you think about. You got to practice talking to yourself and taking control of the conversation. So let me give you a couple of very simple, practical steps. Number one, you actually just have to be able to recognize what's happening, what's being said, right? You got to be able to identify all the toxic, broken thoughts that are on repeat in your head. And one way that you can recognize whether or not it's a thought you should ignore or one you should hold on to is that broken thoughts almost always speak in absolutes, right? It's always, it's never, it's forever. And if that's what's being said to you, just ignore it. Because you can't predict the future. I don't know who you think you are, but your thoughts can't predict the future, right? You're not broken or dumb or hopeless. You're learning. You have room to grow. You have room to change. You have time to become. One of my favorite phrases that I've tried to intentionally incorporate into the conversation that I'm having with myself on an ongoing basis is the phrase, I guess I just haven't learned that yet. Because I have a tendency to just be like, you are 47 years old. When are you going to get your act together? When are you going to actually, I'm so tired of my own act. Like I just have that, I lost my keys again. I lost my wallet again. I did this thing again. I had this stupid habit. Why can't, I guess I just haven't gotten there yet. I guess I just haven't learned that yet. It's okay. So you actually have to be able, to recognize those thoughts. Secondly, then you got to replace them. You got to choose. You can choose to view your situation through the lens of how God sees you, of how God sees it. And one way that you can do that is just regularly test your thoughts by asking yourself, is what I say to myself consistent with what God says about me? Right? Does it serve who I want to become? Is it complete and accurate? And if it's not, let it go and only hold on to what is good. Recognize, replace. Thirdly, it's going to take some repetition. As I said a second ago, this is going to have to be something that you actually get. It's a skill that you have to practice and get good at. So write it down. Post it everywhere. What would God say? What's God's perspective? What's true? What's a verse that speaks life into this moment? Write it down, post it everywhere, say it to yourself as often as possible. Be intentional about it. So if you look on my wife's phone, first of all, she has every picture that's ever been taken ever, in that she doesn't delete anything. But all of her pictures, all of them are of her kids and of us. Like, it's just because she's a better parent than I am. Like, I don't have very many pictures at all of anything. You know, the overwhelming majority of the pictures on my phone are stuff like this: notes, things that I've seen, something I read. On my home screen, I keep statements to myself. I email myself. I put things on my calendar as reminders. Right? I have a handful of things that I have, what I call truth souvenirs. They're just little stuff that I've picked up along the way, things that remind me of something powerful and beautiful that I experienced and once knew to be true and just have seemed to have forgotten. And I just constantly try to bombard my head with what's actually true. See, you got to not only just recognize, you got to replace, then you got to just put it on repeat. Put it on repeat. Because you're in competition of the thing that's already playing. You can't just do it once and think you're going to win. You're not going to shift the conversation that way. Finally, you actually have to respond. You have to begin to commit to actions, to live out your life based on what's true, not on the soundtrack that's running in your head. Right? Because there's a reason why we all know people who've been caught in destructive patterns in their life. And it's because the soundtrack has taken over and they're living their life based on that soundtrack. But the only way you're actually going to be able to shift the conversation is if you begin to commit your life, to live your life in a way that demonstrates what is true, even if it doesn't feel like it, even if it doesn't feel true. See, because you don't have to feel like something's true for it to be true. And you don't have to feel like something's true for you to live as if it is. Recognize, replace, repeat, respond. Finally, this is where we're going to end up this morning. Maybe the best thing you can do, not maybe, the best thing you can do is invite God into the conversation that you're having with yourself. One of the most famous prayers David ever wrote is found in Psalm 139. And maybe it's this kind of behavior, it's this kind of prayer, it's this kind of moment that enabled him to do what he did in 1 Samuel. He said, search me, O God, and know my heart, the real me, not who I pretend to be. Know me. Test me. Know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life. When I was reading that this week, I was like, man, it's really powerful. What did he mean by anything that offends you? And so I just did a little digging. And it's such a weird translation that it gets translated, point out anything that offends you. Because what it really means is anything that's hurtful or causes you pain. Point out anything in me, any conversation in me, God, that's hurtful or causes you pain. And God is a loving Father who created you, right? Like, is it possible that the conversation you're having with you, the things that you say to and about yourself, what if those are the things that God's putting his finger on going, hey, that's hurtful because I know you, I created you, I gave my life for you. I'm your heavenly Father. See, if you could tap into the things that your kids say about themselves, right, it would just be so hurtful for you to discover how, if they hate themselves or how horrible they could be to themselves. And yet God is the same way, even more so. Point out anything, God, that's in me, all the conversation in me that's hurtful to you, that causes you pain as my Father. What if you and I took a few minutes every day this week to simply pray this prayer? See, because there wasn't anything special about David. You and I can learn how to strengthen ourselves in God. We can take control of the thoughts and the broken soundtracks and replace them with God's truth and love. See, Jesus is the only one who could live up to the standards that you're holding yourself to, and you're not Jesus. So you can actually crawl down off of that cross because somebody needs the wood and release yourself from those impossible standards. You can ditch the broken soundtracks and learn to talk to you the way that God talks to you. Let's pray. God, we just want to pause for a moment and invite you into the dialogue. Invite you into the conversation that's happening inside of us. God, there's all of our voices, all of our soundtracks have been shaped and formed by our families and parents and teachers and leaders, people we loved and cared about. They've been shaped and formed by the things that we have done and the things that have been done to us. Somewhere along the way, God, baggage attaches itself to us. And Lord, we don't even realize that this stuff that's on loop so often in our minds, that pretends that it's the gospel truth, couldn't be further from it. And so, Lord, I don't want to rush out of this moment. God, I want us to have an opportunity to invite you to speak into our souls. Lord, for us to pray this prayer, search me, O God. Lord, look at my heart. God, know my thoughts, the inner core of my life. Lord, are there thoughts and soundtracks? Is the conversation one that's hurtful to you, that causes you pain and grief because you're such an amazing, loving God, a heavenly Father because you paid the ultimate price for us. Lord, we want to see ourselves in light of who Jesus is. Lord, not so we have some inflated sense of who we are, but Lord, so that we can actually see, be honest about our brokenness and our sin and our mess, about the things we haven't lost, things we haven't learned yet, all the ways in which we're still growing and changing, all the ways in which we need help. But Lord, resting in the knowledge and the truth that we are loved and prized by God, by our Creator. Lord, as we move out into our lives today and this week, Lord, may this prayer that David prayed, may it become this regular, ongoing prayer every day. Lord, may we begin to exercise this muscle of examining our own thoughts, discarding, getting rid of what's not true. Lord, help us this week. May we not say anything to ourselves that you, as our good and loving Father, would not say to us. Thank you for your help. Thank you for the truth, God, that you care about who we're becoming. Lord, may the conversation that's happening inside of us lead us to be stronger, healthier, better, more like you, just like it did with David in one of his darkest moments. God, thank you for loving us. We honor you this morning. In your name we pray. Amen.